Today, I'd like to introduce you to Christopher Hawke. He has helped thousands of writers from all over the world hone their craft and get noticed. His domestic and international workshops have been featured in numerous publications, including the Sun Sentinel in South Florida, where he has led weekly critique groups for over a decade. Besides co-running CommunityAuthors.com, an author services company, he works one-on-one with a select group of writers from various countries as a writing coach. His client roster includes well-known names in addition to aspiring authors. Mr. Hawke's writing is represented by the Eben Marshall Agency, and his book, The Craft of Writing, hit #1 and maintained a top 10 status on Amazon for years. Welcome, Christopher. I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Serena, for hosting these events for authors and allowing people like me to come and share what it is that I've learned over the years. I've been doing this quite some time. I decided to write fiction in 2000, actually. Started with poetry and all of that stuff as an angsty teen, around 14, and then got into writing fiction when I was really kind of having a decision in my life in terms of what it was that I would like to do with the rest of my life. And so I joined a writing group in 2000 in Colorado that met once every 2 weeks. And I told them right away, that's not going to work for me. I need to meet every week. And so we've taken that format that I learned to do in Colorado, and we've been working with writers for, like Serena said, about a decade. And so there's been a lot of books that have come from that process, a lot of really great feedback, and a lot of learning. So from that learning and meeting with writers one-on-one, I hope to share some of that stuff with you guys today and hopefully help you on your writing journey in terms of where you're at in your project, whether you're starting a book or whether you're midway through a novel or going through the process of editing and reworking it. I hope that this will be very helpful to you. I remember being part of that writing group all those years ago and having somebody, and Tracy, my wife, and I were having breakfast over here earlier today. And I told her, I was so angry when somebody came up to me in that writing group all those years ago and told me that writing is rewriting, because I like to write poetry and let it flow, and whatever comes out is what it is, right? And fiction writing is so much different than that. And what you do come to find out is that so much of it is rewriting. It's a process of perfecting what it is that's in your mind and spirit, soul, and putting it on the page so that someone literally 100, 300 years from now can read your writing and know something about you, something about your story and what makes you up. So anyway, that's why I love it. And I'm so happy that you're all here. Stephen King compared writing a novel to crossing the Atlantic in a bathtub. So that's what's wonderful about these events, and it's why it's great to all be together as authors and have some community. That's why we named our company Community Authors, actually, because let's face it, writing is a very solitary endeavor in general. And so one of the things that we offer is a writing group that meets twice a week. You can pick the night, and you can find out more about that if you'd like on Community Authors as well, right, under community section. Okay. So that's a great thing to get involved with. It's a wonderful way to have accountability and get some real feedback on your book. I highly recommend that if you're writing anything that you get outside feedback, because we all have blinders on in terms of our own art. And when we think it's stellar is usually when we're so close to it, we kind of forget that we have to go through some things that we'll be talking about today to help others interpret and consume what it is that's in our mind, right? So we get to know our own story so well that we just think it's already on the page, right? And so that's some of what we'll be talking about today is how do we get what's in our minds onto a page, both in terms of the macro and also the micro. parts of a story. Lastly, I wanted to mention I've done extensive work on a program that there's quite a few people signing up for that has to do with Amazon ads. And that is if you have a book that's already out there, either a self-published book or a traditional publisher, but you're not happy with the marketing that's going on, you can sign up for a free consultation with yours truly, and we can sit down and talk about your ad goals. So definitely do that if you're interested. Okay, it's called Momentum. It's on communityauthors.com. I recently went to a workshop by V.S. Alexander, who is quite a notable author, and we've done some work with him. And he gave a talk about the state of the publishing industry, what's going on in terms of book sales and such. Now, I'm a huge advocate of writing and writers and publishing and the art of storytelling and all of that. But some of what he had said sounded slightly dismal to me in terms of numbers. And so I was a little bummed out by some of the things that he had said. And then I came home and Tracy and I were watching a show on, I think, Hulu or whatever it was. And I started looking for different shows and flipping through. And what I came across was something very encouraging. And that was the show, the streaming content is based on novel. Some of them were, upwards of 11 years old, but like every single one of these shows was based on novel, right? Every one of them. And I was just like, wow, how many streaming services are there out there right now? How many more are going to be coming up, in the next 5, 7, 10 years? And how important is it to frame the content that I'm writing towards that outcome, right? So there's even writers in the writing group that I host that are writing scripts. They've written their novels, now they're writing scripts on the novel and going to conferences based on that trajectory. I thought, well, that's really smart. That's a great thing to do. In terms of art, writing a book is still the best way to approach this, unless you have a company that produce movies and millions of dollars, right? So you're able to take what's in your mind, put it on the page, learn the craft of making it really act like a movie in the reader's mind. And then you're able to give them that experience for just a sheet of paper and some of your time. It's an extremely amazing thing that we do. And I think we do it so often that we kind of like forget how amazing it is to be able to put images and emotions and dreams and characters that come alive into another person's experience in their life, right? And that's why I do what I do. And it's really an important thing to remember. What I want to do is start at the beginning. It's a good place to start. And what I mean by that is we all have these preconceived ideas in terms of what a story is, of what writing means, of, all of these questions that we should be asking, in my opinion, that we already have kind of the blanks filled in. And so I want to ask you guys what you think stories are, what story is for. If you were sitting in front of me, I'd ask you and you'd be able to answer, but on this platform, go ahead and write into the chat what it is that you guys think that a story is. We'll talk about that a little bit. Oh, very good. Paulette says, the retelling of experiences, real or perceived. That's excellent. It's one of the best answers I've ever gotten. Touch the heart, live through another's experience. Excellent. A journey. Very good. Jane says, creating the world we want. Hi, Jane. All very good answers. All right. Anybody else? Capture the dreams and aspirations of life. Good stuff. Very good. These are excellent. You guys get it, because this is all extremely intimate stuff. This is an intimate interaction between one person and another, and it can be literally, like I said, hundreds of years later. And that's the power that we have as authors that Netflix and Hulu and whatever, they still can't provide what we can with the written word if we do it right. Okay, that's why this is worth learning. So story, in my opinion, is something that is going to convey experiences, just like what was said, right, from one person to another in a narrative form so that we can learn from others, right? So you have a group gathered around maybe the teepees or wigwams or whatever, and then you have the fire blazing and you have the storyteller there, and he's telling about how Bob went down to the river one too many times unattended, and there was the river creature that came up and grabbed him by the leg and dragged him in the water. And what we learn over the course of time is that as people in the tribe start disappearing, not good to go down by the river, and they make that into this larger story about dragons and, over time, all these different mythological creatures kind of crossing time frames here. But the concept is the point. The concept is we learn from other people's experiences, not our own, right? Or of the world's. Tom Cruise is in a basement and he's surviving the alien attack. I'm kind of thinking in the back of my mind, all right, well, if this ever happens, did Tom Cruise make it through when he was in the basement or not? So like at a deeper level, stories are intrinsically about survival and learning from others' experience. We can, in a voyeuristic way, go through somebody's horrific journey in World War II, Nazi Germany, and concentration camp and everything that they endured and see what their survival story was. Right? I don't have to experience that. I don't have to be there, but I can, from a distance, from the comfort of my reading couch, experience the story. Now, why am I talking about all this? Just so that you can understand story a little bit deeper? No. I'm talking about this because when you write, how important is it for you to know what the reader is actually after? So we make these assumptions. Oh, they want to be entertained. Oh, I've got to keep their attention. Oh, this, oh, that. Knowing what it is that a reader is really after at a primal level is going to only help your ability to keep them enthralled and give them what they themselves don't even realize that they're wanting. Okay. So knowing what the reader wants is going to be one of the first steps here in terms of becoming an even better author or writer than you are today. Okay. So with that in mind, we're going to look at our See Who sheet, the first column. It says character. All right. So what is a character? Character can be anything. If it's a Walt Disney show, it could be a teapot. Character could be a puppy. Character could be a person. The things that make a character up, though, are defining that character through certain traits, certain identifiers. So certain traits and identifiers, like a name. We like to give things names, scientific names. Oh, this tree is called that, and this mammal is called this, and whatever. It's a categorization, right? We like to categorize things. We like to come up with names for attributes, right? This character is in this socio and economic class. This character has such and such education. This character has traits, some of them great, some of them annoying. Physical traits, emotional traits. What makes up that teapot or that person that is in your book? Who are they, and how do they become more than two-dimensional, right? How do they become a three-dimensional person or entity? We feel for them. That is one of the objectives. We're going to feel for them. How do we do that? All right. So we have a character physical attributes, emotional attributes, social attributes, you name it. In an environment, it's just the physics of it. If we're not in an environment, we don't exist. We have to be somewhere. It could be the dark side of the moon, or it could be a Taco Bell in New Mexico at 10 p.m. But the character is somewhere. So one way to approach this exercise is to either look at this as a hypothetical news story, if you have a vague idea of what you'd like to accomplish here, or a scene that you've already written, or a scene that you're about to write. Okay. So look at it in terms of where you're at in your book or what you would like to write, and fill in these attributes of the character, the name, all of that in here, because the best way to learn is to do it. So go ahead and do it. Write in the name, write in their attributes, write in the location or the environment. We'll take a minute while you guys do that. All right. So whether it is a character or an environment, one of the better ways to approach this in terms of your writing is to think about it in terms of more details or more attributes up front in terms of a description, and then less later. What I mean by that is you go to this amazing mansion and there's white marble columns, a white marble floor, a wonderful bedroom with beige bedspread, red velvet drapes, and you've got this infinity pool overlooking the ocean in the back. You can hear the waves crashing below, hear the seagulls. You can smell the ocean breeze. Got all of this sensory experience going on, and it's like you're there. You've gotten to know up front the description of the character, and you have a good idea of who it is that we've kind of attached ourselves to for this story, right? We're rooting for them. We have a sense of who they are, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Thing to learn right now, though, is you have a character and an environment, and we have a fuller description up front of each. What happens when we go back to that mansion later on in the story and we describe, say, the marble floor or the marble column, or just talk about or show, right, the infinity pool? What happens in our minds is the same thing that happens in our minds with that environment happens to our minds with the character. And what that is, oh yeah, that was the guy that tapped his pen nonstop on the desk. He's annoying. Oh yeah, that was the beautiful mansion with the infinity pool, and I kind of hear the seagulls again. That had marble floors. Whatever you put in the reader's mind by showing them and attaching this emotional experience at that moment, because I don't know about you, but I get an emotional experience by listening to seagulls and smelling the ocean breeze. It's probably why we all live in South Florida, right? So that's wonderful. And I love that. And I'm now fondly attached to this mansion. Don't I wish I had it? So when the character goes to that mansion and there's, some sort of upheaval, I've already got that emotional layering that the author's taken the time to describe in there. The only thing that they had to say or show is the infinity pool now. So think about that in terms of your writing, in terms of upfront description and then reminders a little bit later. All right. So does anybody have an idea as to what the E factor is? It's not for your hair. Excitement. Good guess. Emotion. Good. Who said, Wayne said empathy. Wayne, have you read the book or was that a guess? That's it. It's empathy. It's a guess. Good guess. That's spot on. I've never had anybody guess that. You're absolutely right. So empathy is key. The reason that empathy is key is because we think that it's already there. So remember when I was talking earlier about all the stuff that we think is already there because it's so alive in our mind, right? The scenes that are most alive in your mind when you write them are the scenes that you need to work on the most because they're probably horrible. The reason that they're horrible is because it's so alive in your mind that you're not taking the time maybe to write it out for the reader. So empathy with our characters is similar because we think, just like maybe, I don't know, the parent of a child, when our child is screaming on the subway, that everybody or the airplane, right? Everybody loves our child like we do, but it's just not true. So when we write a character, we intrinsically want to believe that everybody's going to love Mary. Everybody loves Mary. The truth of it is that you have to make the reader love Mary. So I tell a story about a guy who has a TV repair shop in New York City that's 2 blocks from his apartment. And every day he gets up and he walks the 2 blocks to his TV repair place. So one day he hears this faint cry and doesn't think much of it, goes to unlock the door to his TV repair place and thinks, no, that was something. And he walks back and looks around and hears it again. And he looks in this drainage grate and there's this little white kitten covered with mud in there. And he pulls her out and he washes her off and dries her. And the kitten plays next to him while he's repairing the TVs that day. And then that night when he's walking home, a white van pulls up, throws him in the back of it, leaving the little kitten on the side of the road, and they drive away. Now, we didn't know about the gambling debt, and we didn't know about, all the rest of the story, but we knew about him saving this cat. So the question is, and this is kind of hitting the reader over the head, obviously, but do we care about this guy more because he saved the cat, or would we have cared about him the same if he hadn't, right? And that's a very obvious example, but it drives the point home. And the point is, don't assume the reader already loves your character. What elements are you adding to your story up front? And I'm talking about first paragraph, definitely first page, that are going to endear the reader to your character. Because unless you do that, they're not going to read on. If they don't care about this character, they're not going to read on. So how can we do that? So we have a character in an environment. We have the E factor in place. And we're going to talk about the overarching, which is, where does this character start on their journey in their personhood? What are they going to learn and grow, and who are they going to become over the course of your story? I don't want you to have all of the details ironed out necessarily, but what I do want you to have is a general idea in terms of who this character is at the beginning, right? We've all met people and we're like, yeah, they need to really, they've got blinders on, they really need to learn this. I don't know if you're judgmental. I certainly am. So I weigh people almost immediately and I say, well, they really need to learn that. Well, we need to do this also with our characters and know what it is that their weaknesses are and who they are going to become later on, trial by fire. So what is it that this character wants? Want is one of the most important parts of any story and also life. There's a lot of correlation here to your individual life as well as your story. What is it that you want? Well, you wanted to learn about writing enough and it motivated you to be on here today. And I'm so grateful that you are. But what is the point? The point is that when you want something and you want it desperately, that's key. Desperately, your character wants what desperately? It motivates. It creates action. I once went to a workshop where somebody was teaching and they had said, well, I don't really believe that a character wanting something matters. So I thought about that. I vehemently disagreed. And the next workshop I did, I had a slide with Indiana Jones on it, hunched over before picking up the golden idol, right, in that first movie. And a question on the screen, does this character want anything, right? Obviously, yes. And it motivates. And there's different levels of wants. You're not only going to want one thing, right? You're going to want multiple things. The character's going to want multiple things. So think through your existing story or your new story and think through what it is that they want desperately. Now, there's two levels to this, right? We have the overarching want. John really wants to accomplish being enrolled in Harvard. But we have what John wants in this particular scene, which might be a pizza, right? Whatever it is. So what is the difference between a want and a need? We see needed down there. Does anybody have any ideas on want and need? What's the difference between wants and needs? How do you define that in a story? Ooh, God, you guys are good. Can't sacrifice the need. Love it. That's a good answer. Desire versus survival. So good. Also, really good. Required, yep, to survive. Exactly. Remember when I had said, what is at the heart of a story? What is this story business all about? Survival, right? So we don't want to believe it, right? Because we've got our cars and we've got our air conditioning buildings and we've got our cafes and we've got this and that and our cappuccinos in the morning. At a root level, why is it that, America's Most Wanted is so popular, right? It's like, I come into me, like, what, what's going on out there? I need to know. We watch the news and all that dire stuff. Survival. When I'm reading a book, I'm not looking just for the experience in terms of the vicarious experience, like John said, but I'm also looking for survival tactics. Am I going to survive better if I go to Harvard or if I get a pizza or whatever? These are great answers. I think that in general, the need is something that is an absolute thing needed for survival that you cannot give up. While the want is something that the character, what they decide that they want. A good way to look at that is you have a character who wants a red Ferrari and a mansion on a hill overlooking the ocean. You guys can see this theme, right? I want a mansion overlooking the ocean, right? So, red Ferrari wouldn't be bad. So you have this character who's desperately doing whatever it takes, fighting through business situations and risking it all to get this mansion on the hill and the red Ferrari, when what has been shown artfully to the reader, and it may be something that the character themselves is unaware of, is that what you really need is a loving family to come home to and give you a big hug. What you really need is that relationship to work out so that you have a loved one who really cares about you in this tough world, whatever it is. Right? And so for you as the author to expose this need that the character has is going to create, remember we have said before, a character who's beyond two-dimensional. So now suddenly this character is a real life person. They have flaws. They're unaware of some psychological paradigm within themselves. They have blinders on, like a person. So think through the psychology of your character in terms of what it is that they're wanting desperately and why, and what it is that they need at a heart level, at a survival level, and so forth. So you've got a guy who's been, say, in a basement for 3 days and knows that there's a bomb in the basement of the Empire State Building, and he finally jiggles the lock enough to get out, and he's free, and he wants to, maybe even needs, depending on how you look at it, disarm this bomb. But maybe he hasn't had food or water in 3 days. So he needs also to eat or drink, right? Something, grab some water from the garden hose, and flags down a taxi and is on his way. What is the element that comes into that equation? Somebody had mentioned it. It is the sacrifice. So this guy's sacrificing eating, possibly even drinking, in order to achieve his goal. What does that tell us? It tells us that he's a hero. Right? So who is your hero in your story? Your hero is somebody who's going to take the higher road. Hero takes the higher road, and the wants of a hero, potential needs of a hero, are going to be probably better than your own. I'd probably stop for a burger on the way, but that's just me. All right. The however, John had mentioned it. Obstacle. So the character wants something desperately, needs other things. However, what is getting in our character's way? Now, I've worked with quite a few authors. They fall into one of two categories. Either they're looking at the minutia of things. They're looking at that close-up of the dot and tittle in that scene, or they're looking at the big picture view. They're a big picture thinker. They're thinking about what's happening in chapter 20 and what's happening on page right in front of them, and what we call immediate scene sometimes gets overlooked. So what we're looking at here when you do this exercise is I want you to look through what it is that they're wanting in immediate scene on the page, what is creating an obstacle to them in immediate scene, which means right now in story time. There's the overarching, which is, I think it was John can't get into Harvard because why? Because his mother is ill and he has to work, right, to pay the bills instead of going to Harvard and make sure that she's taken care of. Nobody else is going to do it. Do we feel better about John at that point? Is John taking the high road as far as what he knows to do? I think so. So if John is cruising down the highway one morning going to work, and let's up the stakes a little bit. If John's late one more time, he's going to be laid off. That's been made clear. He wants to make it to work on time, but he's running late. And what happens to poor John? Of course, he gets a flat tire. He rumbles onto the side of the road, and how he reacts is dependent on who he is as a character, of course, right? So we're going to go over to that ongoing section. I purposely don't write in on these three spots because I want you to remember it all the more by writing them in yourself. The first one is physical reaction. The second is emotional reaction, which I'm sure that we've never had. And the third is reflection. So depending on who John is when he gets this flat tire, as he wants desperately to make it to work but gets this flat tire, he has physical reaction. Maybe John is a devout Buddhist and he just kind of Zen Buddhist himself over to the side of the road, no big deal. Or maybe he's a little bit more like me and he's cursing and hitting his fist on the dashboard, right? Who is John? What makes up the psychology of John? So the physical reaction, maybe hitting a fist on the dashboard, the emotional of it, getting angry and cursing, possibly. And then the third thing is reflection. What is reflection? It is when we think through things and come up with another want. We take all of what's happened into consideration and make another choice. So why am I outlining this like this? Remember, I had said things are very tied to, as you guys are already in sync with here, psychology. So I'm not big on formulaic stuff. I think that the best stories don't come from the 2/3 of the act here, and this has got to happen, and then 3/4 of the way through this, that's got to happen. What I like is, and we're going to get into it, I'll show you the format I like. What I like is letting the characters be themselves in the orientation of the story. And the reason is because, well, I'll ask you guys, just by typing in hand, just type in hand if this has happened to you. Have you ever read a story or watched a series or a movie where you say to yourself, I don't think that the character would do that? Has that ever happened to you? Type in hand if that's happened to you. Yeah. Okay. Cool. And yep. Cool. Yep. Okay. So why? Tell you exactly why. And this is going to be hopefully really important for you and help you not create the same mistake that these authors did, or writers, if it's a script, right? So the reason that happened is the author in their godlike state of writing this and deciding on plot first, right, is saying, I need the story to do this. I want the story to do this. But that's not what a story, an authentic story, in my opinion, a character-driven story does or allows. And the example I use is a road trip, okay? So you set out on a road trip with the story, and it's like, you know that you want to make it to Seattle from Florida. Tracy and I, my wife, have actually made this road trip. We want to go to Seattle, and we also want to stop and see the Rocky Mountain National Forest and the waterfalls there. We also would like to stop and see, God knows why, the biggest ball of twine in Kansas. Okay. So these two stops are on the plot of our trip, right? It's on our map. We put a pin in it. We're pretty sure there's going to be a bomb in the Empire State Building basement. Okay. In general, that's what the devious villain's going to do. But how John figures that out and gets there, and whether he drinks from the garden hose or not, or whatever he does, is dependent on who he is as a character. I want to urge you to give some freedom to your story, not direct your story in such a way to where you're concretely saying and forcing your will on this story. No, it's got to be this. That's when your characters truly come alive. And it's amazing when it happens. You probably have all had, I'm hoping, that experience where your characters do stuff that you normally wouldn't have had them do, but they're doing their thing. And that's a great feeling. That's when you know it's flowing and your book can kind of take a course of its own, just like that road trip. So I was just talking with the writer the other day, and the writer said she had started off with a romance novel and ended up with a mystery. It's like when you start with your romance novel and then the character ends up finding a body. So she didn't expect that to happen. It just happened, and her romance became a suspense thriller. Great. Do you think that writing is more authentic and good, and that story more flowing and and true to that character's world and what's happening? Absolutely. So to correlate that with our road trip, I don't know if you guys have been on many road trips, but I happen to love them at times. And when I'm on the way somewhere like Seattle, regardless of what it is that you put into the stops, right, in terms of what pins are in your map there, what ends up being the most special moments of the trip? It's when you stop and watch the most beautiful sunset that you've ever seen. It's when you go to the cafe that you never planned on going to in the middle of nowhere and have the best piece of key lime pie you've ever had, right? When that happens, let it happen. Create a story where your characters can be authentic within the paradigm that you're creating, and don't try to force it into plot points. That's character-driven writing, and I'm a huge believer in it. And it's because it creates the kind of story where the reader or viewer will never say, I don't think that the character would do that, right? So keep in mind that paradigm and what creates it, okay? All right, so we have John here who's heading down the highway, and he reacts physically, and then he reacts emotionally, and then he reflects. Flat tire, side of the highway, late for the job, mom's operation on the line, saving up for, and he still wants desperately to make it to work on time and not lose his job. And he remembers, oh, he's got a can of Fix-A-Flat in the trunk. Okay. John goes and gets the can of Fix-A-Flat, puts it in the tire. What happens? Sprays everywhere. It makes a huge mess. Does it work out? No, never. Chucks it into the woods. Curses. Whatever. Right? Physically reacts, emotionally reacts, reflects. Oh, there's a gas station kind of a quarter of a mile down the road. Maybe I can make it in time. Can't push the car, but if I walk, maybe I'll make it. So now he wanted can I fix a flat, but now he wants to make it to the gas station on time. He gets there finally, sweaty, and finds out that it doesn't open until 10. So what happens in our story when we have these howevers, when we have these obstacles? Well, what happens is we find out who the character is. They have things that they need to overcome. And the story progresses in this fashion. Now, what makes this super, super important is that I have run into so many writers who have started stories and they get halfway through and then it's not making sense anymore. I'm not sure where to go. I'm in the middle here and I have any idea. Like, what do I do here? Well, what creates that dynamic? What creates that dynamic is when we have an idea and we think the idea is actually what we need to make the story with. What we just learned here with the Sihu exercise is that it is not an idea, though ideas are wonderful and they play a role in stories. Nothing wrong with an idea, but it's not a story. We get things confused sometimes. Oh, I've got this great idea for a story, and this guy's going to build a time machine. He's going to go back in time. He's going to change some stuff with the stock market, and he's going to make all this money. He's going to use it for good. Okay, great. And then that happens, and then what? We get to the point where we don't understand what it is that this guy really wants. So what he wants is going to end up driving the story in a meaningful way because of the motivations that are created. So I have a writer that I've been working with him recently, and he had just sent me his new synopsis. And he asked me the question, take a look at this when you have the time and tell me if it's good. So I read through it and, it has some good elements in it. I made, kind of marked it up, and he and I met and walked through it. And the interesting thing that came of that, though, is that more clearly than ever, I realized something that I'm going to share with you today, which is, and I wrote down, I think it's kind of a fun way to put it, plot versus parking lot. So if you can just remember that, plot versus parking lot. So the plot is when we decide on what all is going to happen in our story and outline it all, which, we need some landmarks, but we also need, points to get to at times. But we also want to make sure that the characters can be themselves within the story. But the parking lot, what is that all about? Well, what I told him is that, yes, your synopsis is good. I would change these things. And I think the story is good, but it's not so much the plot points or the bits that you've put in your outline here in the synopsis that make it a good story. It's all the rest of it. If you had a guy that parked in a parking lot and just wanted to go into the diner, you guys can tell that I love food, right? Just wants to go into the diner, right? And make it into the diner. That's all he wants to do. Maybe there's a gunman on the roof, maybe a lot of things. But you can have a good story consist of the guy in the car, maybe it's an old Cadillac, trying to make it into the diner. That's it. That is your story. There's a whole lot more that goes into that, right? What does he want? What does he want now? What does he want now? Who is he at an emotional level? What are his wants and needs? What is his overarching thing to learn that we're going to get into in a minute here? How does he react to things? What are his goals? How do they change? Right? So I want you to really meditate on that. It seems kind of basic at first. It seems like, yeah, I get it. Okay. The guy wants to go into the diner. But really think about it for a minute. The story can be compelling if it's as simple as the guy in the car wants to go into the diner. If you think about your story in that way, or a story in that way, what I think you'll start realizing is that what makes a story great is not all of the plot points that you can come up with and all of the ideas and all of the theatrics. It's not that. It's, who is this person? Do I care about them? What do they want desperately? Is it a high road? Do I want them to achieve that goal enough to where I'm going to continue to read and root for that character? If you can check off on all of those things, you have a winning story. It doesn't matter whether it's in a diner parking lot, or we're taking a person to the moon and doing this, and there's lasers and whatever else you want to throw in there. Not that there's anything wrong with the moon and lasers. It's great. Okay. So that's the micro type stuff with a little bit of the macro worked in terms of our overarching stuff. So you have a V, you've got some ladder rung stuff going on here. You've got normal here. You've got a line at the bottom with dark moment. Get to that. Triumph, arrow, yay. Okay, all of that is our road trip. All of that is our really, really, really basic, this is what a story is. Okay? Again, I don't like this whole, 3/4 of the story, you need to do this act, that act, all of that. Do you think anyone with that sort of mentality is going to come up with anything even remotely original? In my opinion, no. I'm sure they do, but I think a more original story will come from if you're cooking and you're like, well, I wonder if paprika works in here. I don't know. Let me try. Nope, it does not. That's how you learn. That's fine. So what do we have here at the beginning? We have normal. What does that mean? There is no normal, really. Normal means we are starting at a place in the story where we have a sense as to who this character is before we have what's called the inciting event. It's when things change. It's when in E.T. we have Elliot partaking in a typical 80s pizza party with his his family there, and he wanders out back, and it's a little eerie. Have a mood setting kind of thing going. We like that. Very important. Hugely important. Mood. Remember the mood of the ocean and all of that. That's what they call showing. You want to show all of that. You want to show the backyard being eerily lit, and the kind of eerie silence. And then what happens? The inciting event. The baseball rolls out of the shed. Weird. Something different. That is right here. The inciting event. That's right before everything goes topsy-turvy. Oh, gosh. There's an alien, and everything has changed. To use another example, we have the Matrix, right? I use a couple examples that I'm pretty sure that we've probably all seen, okay? E.T. and then the Matrix. Typical programmer. He's got his 9-to-5 job. He's late to work. And hello, Neo. What's that? Well, that's the inciting event. That's where everything changes. But one of the things that authors sometimes forget, it's generally a good idea to establish the normal in your story before things change. Now, why? Because we don't know what the change is unless we've seen before the change. Make sense? And we want to build empathy for this character in some way, hopefully. Okay? So each one of these lines is like a see-who sheet. So an immediate scene for each of these segments. There could be far more. It's on a number kind of thing. Another thing about the see-who sheet, it's a general way to apply some of these concepts to your writing. It's not like a hard, fast, oh, you got to follow this kind of thing. Not into that. It's a way for you to kind of grasp some of the concepts and put it in black and white on a page and go, okay, I got it. I need to kind of remember the character and what they want. But here's where it really gets good, okay? You got a character here who wants something, and you've got another character in the same scene with a see-who sheet that's contradictory to character A. So suddenly you've got two characters, maybe three, and they all want different things. And some of those things, whether they're villainous or wanting to be helpful, are still going to create conflict and tension. Now, what have I not said a whole lot about? Conflict and tension. What do you hear at these writing conference things or these talks? What you need is conflict and tension. Tension and conflict, right? How many times have you heard that stuff? What is tension and conflict themselves? They're concepts, they're contrived ideas of what you, the author, need to shove into that story of yours. I need more tension, so I'm going to have, it's going to be this. Where does real tension and conflict come from in character-driven story? Like I love. The characters and what they want desperately. You have one character who wants to go to Harvard desperately, and yet he's got to save his mom, and his boss wants him to come in on the weekend, otherwise he's fired. But this other thing's going on where he has this opportunity to go to Harvard this one day and do this. And he's got a chance, right? That whole thing. Who wants what? How are they posing each other? Not because it's contrived, but because that's what the reader believes that the character really wants, because that's what they really want. That's it. It's simplified in a good way. So we're descending here, right? Level by level, rung by rung. What might this represent? Go ahead and chime in. I'd like to hear your answers on what do you think that represents, this stair step down or ladder rung down might represent for your story. In other words, we're going to the dark moment. What does this mean? Any ideas? You guys are pretty smart. Anxiety, complications, how the character reacts to tension, and conflicts and strengths. Things are turning dismal. That's true. Dark movement is to make a choice. Yes. Reality setting in. All good? All right. The best answer that I've come up with, but you can certainly come up with your own, is discomfort. So if you have a character who's becoming increasingly uncomfortable about a situation, about his life, about things in general, it's like a vice that's tightening, that's closing. It's like that garbage disposal that, was on Star Wars, and they're all in it, and it's just, there's garbage everywhere, and it's just starting to close. So if you see to it that on every one of these see who immediate scene, your character's growing more and more uncomfortable, you're going to get eventually to the dark moment. The dark moment is where the character has seemingly lost everything, where there is no way that they could possibly get through this. All hope is lost. Everything that they had really, really cared about is gone. A dark moment. It's where you just can't see a way out. So I remember watching the Walking Dead in the first season, the first show, and he is surrounded by zombies. Right? His normal was waking up in a zombie-infested hospital, and this is what hooked me for this series. I'm like, okay, this is good. He went under a tank. Remember that? I don't know if you guys saw it. Went under a tank, surrounded by zombies, and I'm thinking to myself, there's just no way out of it, right? The story dynamic, whether it's our dark moment or not, is a good thing to kind of clue in on, right? So there's no way out, and yet, oh wait, no, there's a hatch. So he goes into this hatch. Oh, but there's a zombie inside. He shoots the gun, he's tough, the whole thing. But that's what hooked me. I'm like, oh my gosh. So let's think about these stories that we had mentioned. E.T. Does anybody know the dark moment for E.T.? Anybody remember that story? What is the dark moment? Yep. Government after them. CIA comes for him. Is captured. Yep. So remember when E.T.'s little heart light went out? His little glowing heart. Sad. Very gripping. Literally just boop, gone. He's died. That's it. End of Steven Spielberg's career. And yet, wait, no. It flickered on, and we move forward with the story. But we have that time in which it seems that it's all lost. Everything is lost. What happens in The Matrix? In The Matrix, we have Neo, who, in a very Snow White kind of a way, is killed. All hope is lost. There's no way out. Everything they ever wanted. And then, oh wait, no, there's that special kiss, and he comes back to life, and then he's faster than machines. And why are these two movies that I can mention and you guys know about? Because the dark moment took us to a place where we really felt like there's no way out. There's no way that they can possibly go past this point. The character in some way in a dark moment has to change in a way to where there's no way to go back. The government's there. The machines are there. It's all going down in a way where we cannot rewind. We've gotten to a point, your character's gotten to a point in the story where there is no rewinding. Things have changed to the point where there's only forward. There's only if I rise to the challenge, which is the triumph. So Neo comes back to life, and he's like faster than the machines, and he's able to do his thing with one hand, pretty cool. And then there's E.T., who's on the bikes, and Elliot's pedaling, and there's the government guys closing in, and there's the cliff. What are we learning from this? Well, it seems like they're with the helicopter and Neo. I hope they're not going to make it. They're not going to make it. And the cliff, Nope, they're not going to make it. They're not going to make it. What happens there at the end? They're not going to make it. But wait, no. The iconic picture that sells millions of t-shirts, that's actually what happened, right? So no, there is a way out. There is a way. So these are somewhat formulaic in a way. You don't have to use the formulaic bit completely, of course, but I think that we can all learn from the concepts in a way to help our own storytelling, right? To help the way that we would craft our road trip, the way that we would conclude a story in a triumph way. A while back, I had gone to a conference and listened to a woman speak who had been one of these people that manages the pre-screening of movies. And she had taken down the surveys of all the people that had watched this movie. And she noted that somebody could love a movie, 95% love it. All loves until the last 5 minutes. And if in the last 5 minutes, that movie does not conclude well, does not what? Give the reader an emotional payoff and or lesson that they can leave with and feel good about. They would mark that movie as, I don't like it. I don't like it. It was good up until the last 5 minutes, but maybe we have a last season of Lost, or maybe we have a Sopranos on our hands. I didn't see either of those, but I know enough about them to not watch them because of the ending. So make sure that your beginning is strong with empathy and the drive that we've talked about today, but equally make sure that your endings work really well. Can't stress that enough. When the beginning correlates with the ending, when we have a character who on that see-who sheet, when they and the overarching are having their want desperately, to get to Harvard and all this kind of stuff, either there's a replacement for Harvard in some meaningful way, or there's a way that he actually makes it to Harvard, that kind of thing. It's like this emotional payoff in a way that correlates with the rest of the story in a very cohesive way. Anyway, that's what we hope to end with in terms of the our stories. And I know this was a ton of information for you guys. I really wanted to give you all that I could today in terms of the macro, the micro, some really good, hopefully, story lessons that you can take with you. I think I'm going to open it up to questions here with the time that we have remaining.
Thanks, Christopher. Feel free to put your questions in chat, everybody, or comments in chat. Also, if you have a longer question that needs more explaining, you can unmute yourself. Does anyone have a question?
What about ambiguity for the end of the story? Or does it need to be resolved one way or the other, happy or tragic?
I think that it's principles. I don't think there's rules, right? I really believe that it depends on the emotional payoff, right? So does the ambiguity create a dynamic where the reader is still feeling as though something worthwhile has been resolved for them? Is there an emotional resolution for the reader? And if not, look at Lost, right? There's thousands. Like I said, I've never watched the show, but I know that there's thousands of people that have taken time out of their day to leave videos on YouTube about how horrific the ending was, right? There's thousands of these things because people are so emotional about it, right? Yes. So with short stories, absolutely, this method works because the same sort of arc and concepts. The only problem with a short story is you're not going to have the time to develop some of the other stuff. So you may need to simplify things in terms of psychology behind the character, a more simplified arc, and maybe one or two main ones instead of something that's more evolved. You are all very welcome. It's been my pleasure. Please do go to communityauthors.com and check out what's available there. There's a lot of resources for you guys. Also, don't forget about the writing group. For those of you who are interested in connecting with other writers and having more of a critique of your work, it's a great group of very accomplished writers that have met for quite some time. Love to see you there as well.